David, are you there, please?
I am. Good morning, afternoon, evening.
Well, let me put it this way. I waited for a very long time to interview you. David Caracas, as many of you know, is an exceptional executive who has served three major biotech companies. I remember it was Amgen, then Kite Pharma, and today's Bluebird Bio, where he is the head of global procurement and sourcing. What's remarkable about David, from my point of view, is that he's also a very systems-oriented executive. I recall when he rolled out ERP and chain of custody platforms at Kite Pharma for the Yescarta product. He is one of those exceptional executives who has 2 CRT drugs to his credit, one developed at BMS and one developed at Kite Pharma. So, David, all morning long, we've heard several times about sourcing, the difficulty of sourcing. Would you describe, from your vantage point, what does that look like?
So first off, I hope you're not expecting payment for the kind introduction. So no, thank you very much for that.
It's my payment for you for the recognition of the work you've done.
So and it's a pleasure to join everybody. Kenny, if you're still on, good to hear your voice. Kenny and I worked together at Kite many years ago, and echo much of what he said. From a sourcing perspective, I think in terms as of late, supply chain resiliency has become front of mind, and being able to support successful commercial launches, not only from the known bill of materials, but also capacity planning, quality release reagents, and even lab consumables that nobody thought were important, and then you realize you run out and they become most important. And so, I'm happy to dive in, Devendra, and have you kind of shape the conversation with question, and folks feel free to ask away in the chat as well.
So I'm going to encourage the folks to shoot their questions in the chat room. So help me figure this out so I can get some focus at BSMA. With the plethora of products, APIs, and services that you have to procure globally, do they fall into certain compartments, into certain categories for prioritization?
Excellent question. So yes, and I think it depends on how you want to characterize them, right? So, single-use components could be a category of product. Vector, plasmid, starting material could be another characterization or classification. Critical reagents / components could be one. So there are a number of ways to, at a high level, categorize products, and that's something that we're early on at Bluebird looking at, is categorizing our BOM, and then coming up with high level sourcing strategies, right, at the high level, and then taking that down further to the actual BOM item itself.
So for a layman like me to understand this whole landscape, when it comes to a bill of materials, which is like the periodic table of chemistry for a business, one measure of maturity, how mature an organization is or how difficult the challenge is, would be to look at how many MSAs do you have, how many quality agreements do you have. You, having worked at 2 large cell and therapy companies, both Kite Pharma and now Bluebird, what's your assessment of how well we are doing in terms of establishing MSAs and quality agreements?
No, that's a good question, and I'll speak more broadly and in terms of having conversation with peers and make it more than just about Bluebird and Kite. Taking a step back, and for those of you that don't know me, I'm transparent to a fault, and I have to be careful because this is being recorded. Taking a step back, right? And I'm going to simplify this because I have to for it to work in my brain. Most organizations in the CAR-T, cell therapy, gene therapy, whatever we're supposed to call it, are spinning out technologies or platforms from very similar institutions. And that process is clearly defined, and you're replicating it, and you're working to get to clinic, address open systems, see if we can use closed processes, and then get through the clinic, good data, now commercial. And I think what you were getting at is now you have an expletive moment that you're commercial. I think on the quality side, we're very mature, right? Because those are must-haves. I think on the MSA side, across the board, that's where things trip up in terms of, for example, speaking with colleagues that have self-manufacturing, both clinical and commercial, there's a gap on MSAs for bill of material and even critical reagents, right? Because it's not just the bomb item that is going to shut your facility down. It could be a mop head. It could be a filter that is used in process. So I think so for organizations that are self-manufacturing, whether it's vector, plasmid, and then actual drug product as well, having MSAs is a gap. And I think the same is, and it's probably exacerbated for those organizations, my general comment, that rely on CMOs, and assuming that the CMO has the supply chain buttoned up, right? So that when I'm sitting down planning on when we want them to make drug product, I think many of us, at least from my experience, have assumed, oh, they got plenty of inventory, we don't have to worry about it. So long as we're not unreasonable and dial up, going from 5 patients to 500 in a week, if we went from 5 to 10, they should be okay. And my experience has been that is a dangerous assumption.
Got it. I see the distinction now between internal and external manufacturing as well as MSA and quality agreement that I was not very clear on in my own head. David, earlier today, several of my supply chain executives talked about lengthening lead times because of the pandemic, the COVID-19. Is that something that keeps you awake at night?
Yeah, especially when lead times are 52 weeks out for some materials, which means they have no idea when they're going to get it, or when we're going to get it. So we have seen lead times extend, and suppliers are working hard. From my perspective, I am no Kenny Choi. I'm not a technical person. I am not allowed to walk into a lab because I'd probably burn it to the ground. But I think a lot of those challenges are self-inflicted. Again, being at a number of different organizations and then, speaking with peers. Tim spoke earlier today about single source suppliers, right? And just for clarification, I view single sources, there are many suppliers, but we are making a decision to go with one and having that one listed in our SOP or our filing, right? I think it's a lot worse in a number of our organizations because we are actually sole sourcing. There is no other place to go. And that even further makes the job of a supply chain professional, quality professional, or sourcing professional I think the only way to solve those issues is those three groups really come together and figure out how to solve, right? And get uncomfortable, because at the end of the day, it's not about me, my opinion, it's not about David's, it's about the patient that we're trying to serve. So yeah, the lead times are definitely something that worry us.
Addressing something else that I feel paranoid about because of lack of knowledge. When a critical material comes to you and either is found to be defective, what is the impact of that? Give me one data point of something that can be very disruptive.
And I don't want to lose it, but there is a question in when there's only one supplier for critical raw materials. So that's a good one. So, you know, I can, again, I have to speak more generally. There have been many times in my career specific to you know, cell and gene therapy that we might have to shut down, like stop actually making drug product. And that has happened more than once. I've seen it pre-pandemic, and I think that alludes to the sole source, which I think is getting to that next question. And so, you know, in order to mitigate it, right, especially organizations that rely on CMOs, it is fundamental to understand your network demand for raw materials. And that has helped because we can shift, right? And it's not ideal. This CMO has the 2 bottles that we need at that CMO, World Courier, Quickstat, whomever, go get those 2 bottles and get it to that production facility. And yes, we drive the finance folks nuts. I report into finance, you know, the shipping is $1,000 for 2 vials that cost $500. But that is to keep that plant and that patient on schedule, right? Because again, for things that I really don't understand, patients could be going into conditioning. And if you say, oh, we're sorry, we can't do that, their body has taken a beating, and they don't have the luxury, especially with many of the diseases that the folks on this call are treating. They're extraordinarily aggressive and progressive. And if there's delays, that doesn't bode well, again, for the patient.
Got it loud and clear. One of the issues, expected issues, but an industry-specific issue, is the high cost of treatment of cell and gene therapy. Does the material cost or the items that you procure, does their cost contribute largely to this problem of the treatment cost being very high? The reason I'm asking the question is, will your efforts of strategic sourcing and procurement reduce the overall cost of the treatment?
It can. So there are, right, I mean, look, everybody knows vector is not inexpensive, right? So that can be a key contributing factor. It really comes down to the fact, it really comes down to the fact that, you know, do you own the IP? Do you own the process and technical know-how and in the backbone of the vector itself? If you can say yes to those 3 things, then you can do a tech transfer. There is a cost to a tech transfer, and I'm not advocating that. You know, I think, right, a number of years ago, like, good luck finding a vector slot. If a CMO or anybody said, you know, just to be invited to the suite is pick a number, and then, oh, by the way, the production cost is this, you got to pay for it, right? That's what the market would bear. I think that's shifting. I'm always thinking and fascinated about what companies are moving to in-house versus in sourcing, vertically integrating, right? Making their own vector, making their own plasmids, making drug product versus those that are relying on CMOs. And as of late, I've been completely caught off guard because a number of organizations are selling their assets, right, to CMOs. And I think a lot of that has to do, Devinder, because we don't know what that looks like right now, right? The cost to operate some of these plants is extraordinarily high, but that might be okay because it helps you de-risk your supply. So I think in some instances, when used appropriately, yes, sourcing can absolutely potentially reduce the cost of those therapies. I think, again, taking a step back or a different view is, of course I work for the industry. These therapies should cost what they cost. Because when you look at, let's say, for example, the cost to treat a patient over the lifetime, right? Their lifetime, that could be much higher than a one-time treatment, right? I know that, not Vertex, but Gilead had to deal with that with, I think it was Vivaldi or one of their Hep C drugs, where like it cured the disease, and everybody was upset because 30 pills cost $40,000. So I'm of course biased. There's things we can do to answer your question, but I'm a proponent that these drugs do drive a high price, whatever that means.
I just registered a thought hearing you that had never occurred in my thick head, that a one-time cost of a cell and gene therapy versus a lifelong cost of another drug is the way to compare the two. I'd never thought in those terms. So thank you for shaking up my gray cells.
No, and again, I'm not the subject matter expert. There was a panelist in the opening session, right? I think the challenge for us is the payers, right? So I've always been kind of a wise ass, like, why are we rushing to be the first in this indication in this cell therapy, right? Again, if I'm working at Juno and I'm competing against Instill or others, like, why be first? Because the payers don't know. And again, that's what makes this industry so exciting, because there's a lot of opportunities to come up with really creative answers. So we'll see. Hopefully folks that are a lot smarter than me, I have a thick head as well, they'll figure it out.
So my final two questions are, for this industry to evolve in an accelerated fashion, whatever that means, reliance on the CRO and the CMO is not a bad thing. What's your assessment? What's your assessment of CROs and CMOs, having worked for two very large cell and gene therapy companies?
I've seen good and I've seen not so good, right? And I think on the good, they're highly collaborative. People own decisions. On the not so good, it's, traditional, typical buyer seller. You told me this, but then I told you that, and you changed your mind. I think when you really need to have a much more careful consideration as a company who's going to work with an outside provider, to just like be honest, right? It's okay not to know all the answers, and to figure out how do we overcome those challenges, right? And so when that happens, I have seen really good outcomes. When folks keep information close to their chest and are, again, resulting in that finger pointing, that at that point in time, the relationship is soured and it can make things very difficult. And the CMO is the extension of like, if they fail, you fail. So, I think, again, you have to be very careful, very clear on what you need, and articulate that need to someone who's going to help you transform someone's life.
Well, that makes so much sense, particularly when one realizes, and having read about Bluebird, if I'm not mistaken, selling its manufacturing facility in North Carolina to somebody.
Yep, that was
So,
last week, I think.
right. Okay, so obviously you're giving your pride jewels to somebody responsible who can do a better job of it. So I think that's a great, great development to take place. And you being, at least the way I know you, David, is you are a person who believes in establishing relationships with suppliers. What message would you like to give to that large body of suppliers that we really need for the revolution that the drug manufacturers are engaged in of cell and gene therapy?
I guess if I had one request, understand that we don't know what we don't know, right? We're still figuring this out. Kenny talked about it, right? We're still trying to understand the process. I think there was a question, right? If you're in the autologous space, incoming cells are different, right? So sometimes things work,
Got it. I could go on for this afternoon, but we need to wrap this up at 1 o'clock. So I wanted to thank you. I've been eternally wanting to do this thing with you. I'm glad we got to do it today. And let this only be the beginning of a dialogue with you. So thank you, David. We will take this message forward in the future with your help. Thank you again.